Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very powerful show coming right up. Our special guest today is Julie Simon, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, When Food is Comfort. Nurture yourself mindfully, rewire your brain, and end emotional eating. Julie has appeared on TV and radio shows across the country on this topic, and she founded the popular Los Angeles-based and online 12-week emotional eating recovery program that offers workshops in venues like Whole Foods and at UCLA. Julie's work is designed to offer a comprehensive, step-by-step mindfulness program that rewires the brain and ends overindulgence once and for all. So let's welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Marianne.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. And my goodness, I think this is a book a lot of people are just excited to get their hands on.
Yes, definitely. Despite all of the diet books that are out there now, we still have 2/3 of adults in the U.S. are overweight. More than 80 million Americans are dieters, and so we're still really struggling with this overeating and weight loss challenge. Here in the very advanced United States.
Yeah, we're still kind of seeing where people are going, gosh, we need some help with this, and it seems that it's tied to a bigger issue.
Yes, it's definitely tied to a bigger issue, and as I said, most of these kind of diet and weight loss books are out there, but they're offering quick advice, diet tips, limited guidance. Their attempt is focused on external solutions rather than internal problems. And clearly, even though the diet gurus will tell us, many different ways to eat, paleo, vegan, all the different ways to eat, most of us have a pretty good idea of what healthy eating looks like. We know we need to be eating lots of fruits and veggies and lots of wholesome, nutrient-dense foods. Most of us know that. So then the question becomes, if we know that, if we have all that information's been out there, and we're always finding out more and interesting new things about taking care of our bodies. But if that information is out there, what is getting in the way, right? Why are we still struggling with our eating? Why are we still struggling with weight gain? What's going on, right?
Yeah. What's the story behind the story?
What's the story behind the story? And that's where I come in. I've been working with overeaters, emotional eaters, imbalanced eaters for nearly 30 years. And what I help people understand is that one of the most common causes of overeating and weight gain is actually difficulty regulating our emotions and our moods and our thoughts and our disruptive impulses and cravings and behaviors. So we're having difficulty regulating that stuff. And as long as we have difficulty doing that, there's a good chance we're going to be turning to food and other substances and unhealthy substances and other behaviors for comfort. So that's some of the underlying stuff has to be addressed.
Yeah, some of the other issues. And so what started you on this path of kind of just, kind of unearthing what's going on with, emotionally eating people,
Well, it's interesting. I think like many girls, and probably boys too, but maybe a little bit more so girls, in my teens, I started to put on a little bit of that puberty weight, and I had a lot of kind of dieters around me. I had a mother who struggled with her weight and was constantly on and off Weight Watchers. I had a stepmother who was obese, and a lot of people were struggling with their weight around me. And in my teens, I began to struggle with my weight, and I was very interested in what this struggle was about for all of us. It was very intuitive to me that, animals in the wild, our early ancestors didn't have didn't know calorie counts and carbohydrate and fat grams. They didn't count and weigh and measure all that stuff. They didn't weigh their bodies. So at a very young age, I was very interested in this and experimented with lots of diets and eating plans, and restricting my eating, and restricting led to binging. And so I was still very interested when I was in college, and I started to run groups for women who were struggling with their weight, and I was struggling with my weight at that time. And so I was always very interested in what was going on. And so during those years, I was kind of stuck in a cycle of overeating my favorite comfort foods, gaining weight, and dieting. And what I became clear on was that I was an emotional eater. That became really clear, and that was one of the first pieces of the puzzle, of the overeating and weight gain puzzle that I figured out, was that I was an emotional eater. And I was using food to calm and soothe myself. It helped numb the pain of unpleasant emotions, self-doubts and other negative thoughts, and general stress. It altered my brain chemistry. And because it's pleasurable and exciting, it was a really good distraction, and it temporarily filled up an inner emptiness or restlessness that I regularly felt, a sort of spiritual hunger. So I entered adulthood missing many basic self-care skills, like the ability to move through unpleasant emotional states, comfort and soothe myself, reframe self-defeating thoughts, regulate my nervous system. My parents were, of course, well-intentioned, but they were missing these skills. So my mom, with all her weight struggles, she was missing these skills. My stepmother was missing these skills. My father was missing these skills. And then to add insult to injury, I had inherited body and brain chemistry imbalances that made unhealthy comfort foods and things like caffeine, stimulants like caffeine, both attractive and addictive. So it took many years of study and visits to healthcare providers and time in therapy for me to understand and resolve all the pieces of the overeating puzzle in my own life. And throughout all that time, I was very passionate about this subject, and I knew that I wanted to help people, recover, help people really understand the underlying issues, the underlying imbalances that cause us to turn to food and kind of get stuck in that cycle with food, overeating, gaining weight, and dieting, that kind of vicious cycle.
Well, and that can be such a vicious cycle. In fact, myself, just about everyone I know, they're at one point or another, they're kind of going through this where they're like, oh, you know what, I put on 5 pounds, or I'm carrying, excessive weight, or I just can't seem to stop eating when I get stressed out. And so it's interesting how many people are struggling with this.
It is, and what's really interesting is that most people kind of still think that it's all about finding that next diet, this is the way I'll do it. Or so many people, I'm not against any of these eating plans, like Weight Watchers or, things, because often we want to get a sense of control, and so we maybe go on a diet because we feel like I'm just feeling out of control and I need some structure and some limits. And there's nothing wrong with that. I always tell my clients, to jumpstart some motivation, to feel like you've got some control, and maybe you lose a pound or two and you feel a little bit better. But that approach, and again, of course, the foods we eat and the amount of exercise we're getting, those are factors that are important in terms of maintaining a healthy weight and a good relationship with food. But that's not the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer isn't about the next eating plan, because what happens, even I have someone I work with now who's, a number of people that have been on Weight Watchers and they've lost a lot of weight, but they become more what I call controlled eaters, where they're kind of always living counting points and counting carbohydrate grams. And the truth is, that's not real freedom. I mean, real freedom isn't where you have to count all the time and, think about all of that. Real freedom is that when you're hungry, you eat food that supports your health, You eat because you're hungry, you eat until you're satiated, and then you stop. And then when you're hungry again, you eat again. And that's how we're designed, that's how we're built. Foods that support our body will shut off our appetite. Cravings are there for a reason, because certain foods are attracted to us because we're craving vitamin C or we're needing macronutrients like protein and fat. So it's normal for us to eat when we're hungry, to make a selection from all kinds of nutrient-dense foods, and then to stop. When we interrupt that, or we try to manage that with counting and controlling, it ultimately doesn't work, and it doesn't address those deeper issues. So we want to get off of the overeating, weight gain diet, find a new diet cycle, and we want to resolve our overeating issues once and for all and have a really healthy relationship with food and with our body. And that's what I'm all about, and that's possible. And I think we can recover from these issues with food, and we can have a really healthy relationship with food in our bodies. We need to learn some skills.
Without a doubt. I think everyone can brush up on their skill set in that area.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we need to, what I'm saying too is, we really need to begin to let go of thinking that it's about the next diet, right? Mm-hmm. And then we need to kind of move in the direction of questioning, what skills am I missing? What keeps me always going back to food, to fill myself up on food? And there can be lots of reasons.
Yeah, it can be just more than what people are typically thinking. So what are some of the major reasons that you are seeing, with the work that you do, that people get in this kind of, get kind of stuck with overeating?
Well, it's interesting. There are really two main causes of overeating and weight gain. Mm-hmm. The first is eating because of emotional hunger and kind of an exaggerated craving for food in the absence of true physiological hunger cues. And emotional hunger can actually feel a lot like physical hunger. So the first main thing that drives overeating and weight gain is emotional eating, okay? And what's really exciting to me about emotional eating, and this is why I wrote this new book, and my first book, The Emotional Eater's Repair Manual, is all about these underlying imbalances. And the second book, the reason I wrote the second book is that recent advances in brain science have uncovered the crucial role that our early social and emotional environment plays in the development of imbalanced eating patterns. Now, I've known this as a therapist for nearly 30 years. I've seen it nearly 100% of the time in my practice, that people that come to see me have not had the kind of consistent and sufficient emotional nurturance during the early years when the brain is forming, when the brain and nervous system are forming. They have not had that. And it's not, my work is never about bashing parents, because I think parenting is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. But even well-intentioned parents can miss the mark in terms of nurturing consistent and sufficient emotional nurturance during the early years when the brain is forming. So what happens is that our nervous system can become wired for high arousal because we didn't quite get the kind of attunement and nurturance very early in our lives. And we can start doing things like I did, like I was sucking my thumb at a very early age for comfort. I was carrying around a little doll with me that had to go everywhere with me. So I was already exhibiting those signs of not getting the comfort I needed and trying to self-soothe, right? And then we begin to turn to food because, as all of us know, food is so incredibly soothing and comforting. I was working with someone last night who was saying, I'm binging again like crazy, and she said, I come home and I'm so stressed out and I so wired up, and it just works. The food just, She said, it's so pleasurable, and I don't have a lot of pleasure in my life, and it just quiets the storm in my brain. And we all know that food and other addictive substances can do that. So what's so exciting and why I wrote this book is that these recent advances in brain science have uncovered all this, and now we know that a mindfulness practice that includes what we call internal attunement. So we get external attunement from our parents, when they tune in to our emotions and our needs and our thoughts. And we can practice something. The good news is even if we didn't get quite enough of that when we were young, we can practice a form of internal attunement so that we're going in there and we're paying attention to everything that's going on. And we learn, in this book I teach readers how to access a supportive inner voice that can comfort and soothe and help us meet the needs that are feeling unmet.
Well, and that's such a big deal because, when you look at the root cause, I'm sure, you're finding some similarities where maybe you talk about this, where they're not feeling supported and maybe feeling, not heard. There's lots of different things, not worthy enough, and so that all kind of plays into that.
It does, and what I see across the board is that people are missing skills. Okay, so I've seen this across the board that people are missing skills. What kind of skills? Difficulty regulating emotion. Okay, so whereas one client of mine might be grabbing food at work because she's stressed out and hyped up, and so she's grabbing food to calm down some of that hyped up feeling. Another person is kind of bored and unstimulated at work, and so she's eating because of low arousal states. She doesn't know how to regulate these low arousal, boredom, apathetic, unmotivated kind of states. So she's eating to fill up that. Another person is coming home and heading to the drive-through on the way home because he is feeling down. He feels kind of sad and frustrated about his life, doesn't have a partner, isn't happy with his job, so he's frustrated and sad and down. All of these people, we could kind of take little vignettes, across the city, right, of people having stuff that's going on, emotions, right, unpleasant emotional states that they don't know what to do with. So this is one of the major problems. How do I regulate unpleasant emotional states? That's a missing skill. Okay? Next missing skill.
They never taught that in school,
They don't teach that in school, and this is where that early sufficient and consistent nurturance comes in. If your mommy or your caregiver, whoever that is able to help you in the beginning, we need our mommy or caregiver to regulate those states for us. An infant doesn't know how to regulate tension, emotional tension, physical tension. So mommy swoops in, mommy kind of tunes in. She sees the baby is in distress. She swoops in, and she begins to comfort and soothe, and the baby calms down. Baby begins to associate mommy with comfort and soothing, right? As the baby grows, the baby begins to learn how to do some of that for herself. She starts to co-regulate with mommy. She starts to begin to learn how to hold those kind of soothing thoughts for herself. And as she grows, she's building a voice inside that it's her mommy's voice or her daddy's voice or grandma's voice, building a soothing, comforting, regulating voice. But so what happens if we have a mommy who's anxious and can't regulate us, or who's very distracted and, looking at her phone and doing 10 million things while we're in distress? Again, not to blame parents today. That's the other thing, is that it's very challenging for parents today. 100 years ago or more, children were raised in villages. There were lots of adults around. A mom wasn't totally on her own, with two toddlers all day trying to get errands done. It's very challenging for parents today single moms, single fathers, parents that don't have a lot of outside support when they're raising children, much more difficult for us to nurture our children properly and get those brains wired properly. So if that was happening, the baby would learn to co-regulate. You'd have a little toddler beginning to regulate him or herself more. And then those skills develop. Another skill is learning to reframe, kind of catch and reframe self-defeating thoughts. If we have a mommy that's hearing us say self-defeating thoughts, and she helps us reframe that into something more positive, the girls at school don't like me, nobody likes me, no one will ever like me. We need mommy or daddy or someone to help us reframe that into something more hopeful and optimistic. So these are all skills, being able to regulate emotions, being able to catch and reframe self-defeating thoughts, learning how to grieve losses and disappointments. We need someone to teach us how to grieve losses. When Fluffy dies or Grandma dies, we don't want that all covered up and just we move on. We need to know, how do we grieve? It's okay to feel those feelings and to move through those feelings. So these are all skills, identifying our needs, getting clear on what we need, knowing how to set limits with ourselves and boundaries with others. These are all very, very important self-care skills. And I talk about these skills in my first book also. And then in this book, I really help people learn. I take off on what I started teaching in my first book, is developing that inner nurturing voice. In this book, I really help people understand why they need to develop that voice. They're going to rewire their brain with that voice, and learn how to develop that voice and the skill set that goes with it.
Gosh, that's so important, because you're so right. All these factors come into play when we look at some of the reasons why we overeat as emotional eaters. But it's so nice to know that there are things that we can do to turn that around. And I know in your book you talk about mastering the skill of self-regulation. What does that all mean, and how can we implement that in our lives?
Well, self-regulation, again, when we talk about the person who's driving home, from work and is flooded with all these feelings. I feel overwhelmed. I feel frustrated. I feel empty. I feel sad. I'm kind of even numb from all these feelings that I'm having, and I just don't know what to do with them. This is a huge problem in our culture. People are having emotions, and they don't know how to handle them. They don't know how to regulate them. So self-regulation really means, it refers to our ability to regulate those emotions that we're having, those moods that we're having, to regulate our nervous system, to control or redirect our disruptive impulses and behaviors, and think before we act. So a good example I like to use, I have this example in my first book, is when I was younger, I would, let's say, go shopping, go to the mall and go shopping, and I would go in a dressing room, okay, and I would just be very frustrated and upset with the clothes weren't fitting, I didn't like the way my body was looking, maybe I had gained a little weight. So I would come out of the dressing room just flooded with emotions that were unpleasant. I hate myself, I hate my body, I'm never going to lose weight, nothing ever fits, I hate these department stores, whatever store I was in, they don't make clothes that fit me, and just flooded with all this misery. And no skills. I had no skills to comfort myself other than to go get food. So what would I do? I'd head into the food court and I'd pick some food up and head home, right? Just miserable. Mm-hmm. What I needed to learn to do was to find some way to regulate these emotions, right? So not only was I flooded with unpleasant emotions, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm overwhelmed, I'm depressed, but I was also having self-defeating thoughts. I hate my body. I hate myself. I'll never lose this weight. I'll never find anyone at this weight. All of this, emotions, thoughts. I was totally unaware of my needs. What I really needed was soothing. I needed comfort. I needed reassurance that I could get where I wanted to get to. I needed some self-love, right? But that was nowhere to be found. I didn't have any capacity for giving myself that, for those needs, right? So all I was left with, I was like a baby, left in a crib crying. Like I have nothing, no way to comfort myself, so put the thumb in the mouth, right? Mm-hmm. What's the thumb in the mouth for most of us? Go get a cheesy noodle dish, right? But what we all know is that doesn't build skill. It does not build any skill. So we have to stop. We have to pull away from the urge to turn to food to solve all that storm that's going on in the brain. We have to pull away from the food. We have to sit down, and we have to begin to practice some skills. And the very first skill in this book is about popping the hood. Pop the hood and find out what is going on. Get really clear on what emotions you're experiencing and what's happening to your body. How is your nervous system getting dysregulated? So maybe you notice, I'm feeling sad, frustrated, overwhelmed, and depressed. Okay, well, what do you feel in your body? Well, I feel a lot of tension in my muscles. I feel kind of a racing feeling going on in my chest. My head is starting to hurt. And I'm noticing I'm clenching my fists, okay? Mm-hmm. Just the act of tuning in, popping the hood and tuning in to yourself, research shows is already calming, right? So we're already beginning the self-soothing process just by tuning in. It's called attunement, right? It's what we missed when we were little. We didn't get enough of this. So now I'm internally attuning. Okay, something's going on because I'm leaving this dressing room and all I can think about is Cinnabons, right?
Yeah.
So something is going on. Let me go pull away, not walk to the food court. Maybe let me go sit in my car. I give myself permission if I need to. I'll go get those Cinnabons later. They're not closing yet. Mm-hmm. Pop the hood. What is going on? Begin the process of regulating your emotions. For all overeaters, if you don't learn this first skill, you're just not going to recover. You might become a controlled eater the rest of your life. You might go on diets the rest of your life, but you're not going to resolve the underlying issues that are leading you to always go back to food for comfort.
And that's just miserable, when someone has to keep going through that dieting process. That's just a miserable way of existing.
It is, and it's a terrible relationship with yourself because you're back to, your relationship with yourself is based on a lack of trust. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I can't trust myself. Basically, I remember when I was in my emotional eating days, I could not trust myself with many different foods in the house. If I brought bread in the house, I would overeat the bread. If I had chocolate in the house, I would overeat the chocolate. For many years during my emotional eating recovery days, I couldn't have any kind of nut butters in the house, peanut butter, almond butter, because I would be good for a day or two, and then all of a sudden I'd start to throw raisins in it and chocolate chips in it, and I'd be bitching on it.
Yeah.
So my relationship with myself and food was one where there was a lack of trust. I couldn't trust myself to bring something in the house that was, delectable to me, even a loaf of sourdough bread. I could not trust myself with those foods. And so that, what healthy relationship is based on, or I'll reframe that, all healthy relationships are based on trust, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have trust with yourself, you're already having an unhealthy relationship with yourself. So that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. It's kind of like, it doesn't even have to be about food, but it can be, again, someone I was working with yesterday who was saying, I cannot get myself to do the things I need to do. I can't get myself to declutter my place. I can't get myself to work on my resume. Basically I can't activate myself to, or drive myself to do the things I want to do. Again, this is a problem in your relationship with yourself. That doesn't feel good when you can't trust yourself, when you say, I'm getting up at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever, and I'm going to declutter that room, and then I'm going to start working on the resume, and for months, every time you say you're going to do it, you don't do it. You don't feel good about yourself when you can't trust yourself.
Yeah.
So something deeper is going on in the relationship you have with yourself, and this is why you keep going back to those foods that don't work for you. And you ultimately
kind of a cycle. It's kind of like this cycle that people get stuck in.
It is like a cycle, and we can even add one more piece to that, which is earlier on I said, there are a couple main pieces of what drives overeating and imbalanced eating and weight gain. And I said one of those was an inability to self-regulate or to manage emotions and moods and behaviors. The other thing that drives overeating and weight gain is body imbalance, right? So what that means is we might have brain chemistry imbalances. I talk about that in the new book, and that can come from this lack of nurturance when we're young. So we might have low moods, we might have depression, we might struggle with anxiety. A lot of people turn to food to regulate those moods, and some of that is biochemical. Overeating is also driven by things like hormonal imbalances in sex hormones, imbalances in insulin, and then also things like food allergies and food addiction. And so many people I work with will come in and they'll tell me, I know I have a food addiction with bread, with flour. I know I have addiction with sugar, alcohol, diet sodas, whatever. But they cannot stay kind of sober, if you will, off of those substances. And I say to them, it's not just because, I know you think it's because you lack willpower, but it has a lot to do with your self-care, your ability to nurture yourself, and then to set limits on these particular substances. Like I have allergies, flour, for example, and if I eat it, I immediately feel an addiction. Very strong cravings come up. But because I have such good self-care, I can walk in the market and I can look at a loaf of bread and I can say, I can just imagine the bliss that will go on in my brain if I start eating the wheat. And then it's very easy for me to access a limit-setting, nurturing voice that says, I get it, sweetie, you're tired, it's been a long day, that bread looks like it would really elevate all those chemicals, and it would, right? But that's not good for our body. That's not good for our body. We have an allergy to that, and that makes our head stuffy, and that makes our tummy not feel good. So let's find something different. Maybe we're craving, carbohydrate or starch. Let's go bake a nice fluffy potato, or let's go have a dish of brown rice. That will work without imbalancing our body. So because I have that loving voice, I'm able to notice those kind of cravings, if you will, or impulses for addictive foods, and I'm able to set limits on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I know in your book you do talk about developing that supportive voice. How long did it take for you to do that, and how does that work in just changing how we're moving forward?
It's so funny that you asked that. Someone yesterday who I've been working with for a very long time, and she kind of tends to resist building that voice, we were talking about that again yesterday, and excuse me, she said, well, how long is it going to take me to build this voice? And I said, really, that's not a good question to ask because, first of all, I can't answer that. I mean, it really depends on where you're at, how hard you're going to work on it. It's like asking someone how long will it take me to be a good guitar player. I mean, how often are you going to practice? You're going to practice 4 times a day. You're going to practice once a month. So it's difficult to answer that. But what I can tell you is that in the beginning, when you're starting to access an inner nurturing voice, it's going to feel awkward. If you haven't had a lot of exposure to a voice like that, or you haven't had access to anything like that inside yourself, it's going to feel a little awkward and a little phony at first. And, very similar to when you're first learning to play a guitar and it feels really awkward, or you're riding a bicycle. The key is going to be to stick with it and to, listen to the wisdom of people that have walked ahead of you in these shoes, like myself, and stick with it and keep doing. I take people in all my books. I give a lot of skills and a lot of examples, and I walk you right through everything. I also have a 12-week program. People can work with me. I walk them through everything. You keep practicing, you keep practicing, you keep practicing. And so in my own journey, I kept practicing this voice because I just had an instinct that it was important, this voice. Mm-hmm. So I kept working on it. And over time, I cannot tell you how long it was, there just was a point in my journey, and this was a real turning point for me. I was laying in bed one day, and I heard a voice inside my head that said, I love you, Julie. I love you. And I was like, where did that come from? Like, whose voice is that? What was happening was that because I had been practicing this, self-love was beginning to develop. I was beginning to really care about myself in a loving, kind, nurturing way, rather than the kind of harsh, critical. I came from a fairly shaming, judgmental, critical mother, so that voice was beginning to reside. I think that wasn't the word that I wanted, but as that voice quieted down, and this is one of the skills we work on in the book, is learning how to kind of silence. That's the voice I wanted, the word I wanted. As we learn to silence and quiet the voice of the inner critic, right? Most emotional eaters have a very, very loud, strong inner critical voice, constantly telling them they're not good enough. And that inner nurturing voice is tiny and very undeveloped. So as you begin to silence that other voice and build the inner nurturing voice, and I always have a saying that I say, never let the inner critic have the last word. So when you're busy beating yourself up, I did terrible on that, I'm a piece of crap, I'll never, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Never let the inner critic have the last word. You must bring in an inner nurturing voice that says, hold on, I don't like this beating that's going on here.
Yeah,
I'm here too. I'm here to say you are wonderful, you are beautiful, you are incredible. And by the way, did I tell you how much I love you today? Right? Always bringing that voice in. Now, in the beginning, if you haven't had a lot of this, if you didn't hear a lot of this when you were young, it's going to feel fake. It's going to feel artificial. But you must keep with it. That's why I ask people to write it. Practice writing it, because over time, you might say, this doesn't feel natural to me, but it sure feels like something I'd like to have feel natural. So let me keep working on it.
It must make such huge shifts in the person themselves, but I know in your book you talk about how it really kind of rewires our brain.
It does rewire the brain. I'll tell you something, that is what is so exciting, and that's what led me to write this book, is that I was practicing these skills. I was picking up these skills from different places, therapy, people I noticed who seemed much happier and healthier emotionally than I was. I was picking up these skills all over. and practicing them and piecing them together, because any therapist I went to didn't have this all laid out for me. Nobody had it laid out for me. So I was kind of finding all the pieces of the puzzle and the emotional derailment, if you will, puzzle as I went along. And I didn't know the neuroscience back then. I didn't know what had happened to my brain. I only knew that I wasn't the same person anymore. I was once someone who really beat up on myself hard. I mean, I'm a pretty driven person, but I was pretty perfectionistic and very, very hard on myself. That voice isn't there anymore. It just isn't. And people might think I'm making it up or it's not really true, but it is really true. I don't have a harsh, critical voice in my head anymore. We all need an inner critic that says, you know, I kind of blew it. I didn't prepare for that exam, and I need to study a little bit more. We need to have someone that can give us constructive criticism, but none of us need a destructive inner critic in our head. And so over time, as I practiced these skills, something was happening to my brain that I didn't know about until I started to read years later the neuroscience about it. And I began to understand that what happens when we're young and we don't get that sufficient, consistent nurturance that we need is that there are connections that are supposed to form between the emotional brain, which is kind of the lower brain, the middle part of the brain. The emotional brain, that's the part of the brain that is like your alarm system. It tells you, you know, to back off from the snake, you know, or run from the person that's trying to grab you. That's the emotional brain. When we don't get enough consistent, sufficient nurturance when we're young, that part of the brain doesn't develop these kind of connections, neuronal firing patterns, if you will, between the upstairs part of the brain, which is the cortex, which is the part of the brain that regulates. That's the part of the brain that soothes and comforts and regulates our emotions, our moods, our impulses, our behaviors, our thoughts. So if we don't get that consistent attunement coming in our early years, those connections between the soothing part of the brain and the emotional brain don't connect. And so what does that ultimately mean? It means that when you're very, very upset about something, you cannot access a soothing function in your brain. So this is what we see with overeaters. They cannot access, there's no access to a soothing function. Those neuronal firing patterns have not developed. So when you think about it, if you don't have those firing patterns going on in your brain, you are basically left to figure out some way, like a baby, suck your thumb, grab a dolly, you know, you're left to find something to regulate the alarm that's going off in your brain, the bad day that you just had, the fight with your husband, whatever. So that would be kind of hopeless. Like if that could never be wired in, what didn't get wired in when we were young, it would really be hopeless. It would be like, okay, we're just stuck turning to substances the rest of our days. But the good news is that we can create those firing patterns. The brain, we now know the brain has something called neuroplasticity, which means the brain is malleable and moldable and plastic, and we can, through our experiences, like practicing the skills that I teach, we can now wire in those connections. We can develop the soothing, comforting function of the brain. That's by practicing that voice. And by doing that, when we're in an emotional state, that's our emotional brain, we're going to wire in this soothing pattern and these connections. So down the road, initially you have to practice and practice and practice, just like playing that guitar. Initially you have to place your fingers on each fret and on each string and then pluck, right? Initially it's very awkward.
Yeah.
But over time, when you keep at it, same with the brain, you will be very upset about something going on in your life, and all of a sudden, whoosh, in comes an inner nourishing voice that says, hey, sweetheart, I know you're really upset right now. I'm right here with you. and begins to soothe you, right? Maybe you just took an exam and you got your results and you didn't pass and you're in a tizzy, right? All of a sudden the inner nurture swoops in and goes, okay, I know, of course you're upset. Of course you're upset. It's okay to be upset. I really understand being upset. I'm right here with you. You begin the soothing, okay? Because none of us can think straight when we're upset. We need to calm down first. We need to know how to calm ourselves. So this is the wonderful, fantastic thing about the brain science we now know, is that we can rewire the brain. And as we learn and practice these skills, we rewire our brain. And then it doesn't take all this work down the road. It takes some applied energy and time now, but down the road, you're going to be a great guitar player.
Yeah, it ends up being just second nature.
Yes, for me it's second nature to calm and soothe myself. Because I always say this to my clients, when they're talking about being overwhelmed, I say, every successful person that you see that you maybe even aspire to be gets overwhelmed on a regular basis, right? I say, I get overwhelmed regularly. I clear out my desk, everything seems to be in order, and then 17 other things pile on, and then I'll feel overwhelmed, right? And then I work through that with a very nourishing, nurturing voice. It says, okay, let's figure out what's a fire that needs to be put out. Let's figure out, what can wait. Okay, we'll do that 2 months from now. In comes that voice that calms me and soothes me very quickly and very naturally. And I always say to people, if I could learn to do this, anybody could, because I did not have anything like this going on in my brain when I was younger. I was really missing it, and I was overeating, and I was binge eating, compulsive binge eating. So if I could do it, you could do it.
Well, it gives great, just inspiration to people that regardless where you are in your journey with food and just being the emotional eater, that there's hope. It's not like this is the end game, because it seems like a lot of times when we've talked about this, how it's just people can kind of yo-yo back and forth on diets and not really getting to what the root cause is, which you really have established here.
Yes, and established the path, to resolving it. I mean, when people come and work with me, whether they come work with me privately or they take my 12-week program, they always say, this is right on. I mean, they just do, because it's intuitive. You know that you're missing these skills, and that, once you know, you can kind of never go back to unknowing, that you're missing skills and you need to gain these skills. And that's the wonderful news that I always like to tell people, is that it's not that there's something desperately wrong with you. You're just missing some skills that are really learnable.
And you can replace them with healthy habits.
Exactly, healthy habits, and learn to have self-love through the process. You learn to love yourself and really care for yourself in a way you probably never have before.
Yeah, it leaves people with the opportunity to kind of look at things in a different light. Well, and so what would be some, like if you can offer just one piece of encouragement or advice to someone who's an emotional eater, what would you like to leave them with?
I would want to tell anybody who's struggling with emotional eating would be to not lose hope, that there's true recovery out there, to not think that this is about another diet that you have to find, or that you'll never, ever, have that body that you feel good in, or have a good relationship with food. I would just say never to lose hope. Practice the skills, that I teach in this book and that I teach in my first book. Keep at it. Rather than keeping going back to find a new diet all the time, go back to the skill building when you fall off, and you will. I mean, we all fall off of our skill building pick the guitar back up. Start plunking around. Sit down to the piano. Start plunking around on the keys again. Go back to your skill building, and you'll find that you already built a little bit of skill. Keep at it. You get to kind of a turning point with anything, like using our guitar analogy, but with anything, you get to kind of a turning point where it starts to feel much more natural. You and I were talking earlier about skiing. I remember when I was first learning to ski and snow plowing, I was like, God, how do you ever get the hips and the feet and everything like going? And then just one day from continuing, your body starts to do it. Same thing with building that inner nurturing voice. At some point, it clicks. And I can't tell you if that's 3 months, 6 months, or 2 years. I do ask people, especially when they work with me, I ask them to take the focus off of some quick weight loss. Take the focus off of losing weight and put the focus onto gaining skills. Because with this approach that I teach, the weight ultimately comes off, and it comes off much more effortlessly than it ever does with a diet. So put the focus on the skill building, learn the skills that are in the book, get some professional assistance if you need it, but you can do it. It is doable. Anybody listening to this who's struggling with their food, I get it. I know where you're at. I've been where you're at, and complete recovery is possible. That's the good news. Complete recovery is good news. Yeah.
That's a lot of inspiration, for people. And so if someone wants to connect with you and be part of your community, where can they go?
They can go to my website, Overeating Recovery, with no spaces, overeatingrecovery.com. I also have, as I said earlier, I have a 12-week program that they can participate in, and we go through all the skills, the self-care skills, the body balancing principles, and the soul care practices that I teach in my first book. And we also cover all of the stuff, because it all goes together, of the second book in the 12-week program. So they can work with me live in Los Angeles. They can also work with me. My program is in a teleseminar coaching format, so we have lectures and live coaching calls with me weekly. Can find out all about that at my website, overeatingrecovery.com.
Oh, awesome. Well, Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today and sharing your great book, When Food is Comfort.
Thank you for having me. And by the way, if people go to my website, they can get 2 free chapters of the book, so they can get started right away.
You get going and not have to wait for the book to arrive. That's even better, right?
Yes.
Well, Julie, thanks so much. We appreciate you spending your time here and sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for having me.
Well, that's the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.